So we've talked about a lot of barriers that stop people from accessing the internet, and increasingly affordability came up in our panels today about it's not just whether or not you can physically get it, but how can you afford it once it's there. So we are going to have an entire panel discussion based on this. It's going to be led by Bram Abramson, our moderator. He is a Toronto-based technology, data, and communications lawyer who sits on the Ontario Securities Commission's FinTech Advisory Committee. He's also on the Canadian Internet Registry Authority's Community Investment Committee. He's the past director of the Commission for Complaints for Telecom Television Services, a graduate of the WIFT Media Leadership Program. He holds a Fellow of Information Privacy and certified in-house counsel. But most excitingly, he is a licensed private investigator. Please invite my friend Magnum PI, Bram Abramson. Okay.
Thank you, Lynn. So I'm excited to have a chance to moderate a pretty great panel, actually, with some really interesting and a broad set of speakers on a topic which will probably be new to a lot of you: telecom affordability. Yeah, it's something that, in all seriousness, does get talked about a lot, and here we're hoping to maybe put together some constructive ideas. So I'll ask Janet Lowe to come up. She's Vice President of Privacy and Consumer Legal Affairs at TekSavvy, formerly a lawyer at PIAC, the Public Interest Advocacy Centre, formerly of the Canadian government for a little while, and really has seen lots of sides of these issues. So thank you, Janet. Philip Palmer, so please do take your seat, as they say. Philip Palmer, a board member of the Internet Society Canada chapter, a lawyer here in Ottawa as well as in Middle Europe from time to time, and a longtime federal civil servant at the much lately talked about, for whatever reason, Department of Communications. Tamir Israel as well is somewhere around here. He is a longtime staff counsel, I think I can now say, at CIPPIC, the Canadian Internet Policy Public Interest Clinic at the University of Ottawa, and he is the possessor of lawyers' robes that have been to the Supreme Court likely more than most other robes in this country. Madeleine Redfern, who is here with us as well. She is second term, I believe, mayor of Iqaluit. She is, I think, the first Inuk to clerk at the Supreme Court of Canada. She is involved in setting up an internet exchange in Iqaluit, and generally has a very broad set of experience around these issues in the north. And then I'll also ask Gisèle Bouvier to come up. She is a former cartographer, a former bank teller. She ran a screen printing business for 17 years. She is a longtime civil servant, but for the last 5 years, she has been working with ACORN, a national organization that does advocacy around low and medium income families. She's been very active on telecommunications issues, in particular around bringing lower priced internet access to Canadians. So, a star-studded panel. I'm excited to moderate it. And the first thing I think we'll do before we get into more substantive matters is simply ask everyone, who are your service providers and what do they charge you? Janet, do you want to start?
Sure, I'll start. My internet service provider is TekSavvy, which hopefully is not a surprise to anybody. I pay a low rate. I actually pay a company rate, so I shouldn't, but I believe that the retail rate on my internet plan is about $49.95 a month. I have an unlimited plan, no data overages, which is great. My cell phone is currently with TELUS. I pay a lot.
I get my internet services, television, and not my cell phone, from Bell. I have a cell phone with Bell. My cell phone, I hardly ever talk on the phone. Don't message much, but I use the internet a lot. And I have 6 gigs, and I pay about $65 a month for that. and the other package is too ugly to discuss. Oh, but I should say that I have a second plan because I'm often in Vienna, Austria, and there I get 1,000 minutes of voice time, I get 1,000 SMS, and I get 5 gigs for the equivalent of $15 Canadian.
Can you roam in Canada with that? Before I cut my cord 4 or 5 years ago, my cable cord, my phone cord, it was a Bell. I think actually that was 10 years ago probably. I cut my cable cord about 5 or 6, 7 years ago, maybe 6 years ago. I was an early cord cutter. I think that was Rogers. I'm in the process of switching to TSI for home internet, and I have Kudo as my cell phone. And I don't have very many gigs. I think you have more gigs than me for mobile.
Okay, I live in Iqaluit, Nunavut, and I'm totally jealous of Europe, but I'm also jealous of anyone south of north of 60. And actually, truth be told, I'm still jealous of NWT and Yukon. So what do I pay? My home internet, if I do residential, and I was just tweeting about it, would cost me about $129 a month if I chose the package of about 100 gigabits, sorry. But since I have a business plan at home, I pay $500 a month, which gives me 200 gigabits, really low speed at about 15 megabits upload. And my cell phone is with the city, and the city of Iqaluit has approximately 25 sort of managers and people who work at a desk, and we pay $25,000 a month, which includes my cell phone. So that's $300,000 a year for 25 people. And I have cable because I have no option of adding, Netflix and TV through my internet. So that's another $120 a month, and it's really crappy. I watch about 5 channels between me and my husband. And my husband's cell phone on Bell is about $100 a month. And I feel like I'm missing something. So I've got down the internet, cell phone, and cable. So yes, really outrageous prices. The highest probably anywhere in Canada.
Giselle, does that make you feel any better?
Well, I find it very sad that it's prices like that. I know we had heard of somebody in New Brunswick who was in a rural area, was paying like $180 a month. So the rural and the remote regions are really badly served. So myself, I've got Rogers, $73 a month, unlimited access, 30 megabit. I got that plan recently when I got a phone call, and I made a leap of faith. I said, okay, I'll say yes, because it was going to be like $90-some, but they said if you in 3 months, you can cancel that part of it and come down to 73. So after all the stories we hear about the telecom companies, I said, okay, this is tempting. Anyways, we'll see what happens. And it turned out to be true. I was really pleasantly surprised to see that. And also I've got Kudo for my smartphone. And that's was $40 a month, but now it's $52 because they convinced me to get a Samsung at half price. So that's it. No cable. After all those reality shows, I cut that cable many years ago. It was one of those programs where they travel around the world, and the guy had to eat something, which I won't tell you what it was. But I got so disgusted, I got up and phoned Rogers and canceled my cable.
Well, I just subscribed to cable again with the rise of the Raptors, and so I have my $60 TekSavvy plan, and then my $20 plus $20 for the Raptors, $100 TekSavvy Bell, and then a couple hundred more a month for the various cell phones in my family. And so, I think it's a broad range, but certainly we see things can get really expensive, and nobody's really happy about this. So the next question really is, who cares? From a policy standpoint, should legislators, should policymakers create special rules requiring that, whether it's by regulating prices, by engineering competition, by some other means, telecom services have to be affordable? And more importantly, perhaps, why? Janet?
Sure. I think we've had a really great conversation today about the importance of the internet and how it has a power to connect people and equalize opportunity, access to education, access to work. It is increasingly viewed as an essential service. And so the conversation is more than just, how much does this particular service cost? It's how much does this service cost, which is viewed as a public good. So I think that's sort of that's the lens we have to view the question of affordability or why it's important. From my corner of the world at TekSavvy, we have lived experience in our call center. We take over 1 million calls a year from people looking for service. And I try to spend a bit of time every week on the floor listening into calls and supporting where I can. And the number one thing that comes up when people are looking for service is they're tired of being overcharged. They're tired of getting the annual rate increases from what they perceive as not a lot of choice. They're tired of new charges showing up for customer service. They're tired of being taken advantage of by what they perceive as a market with very few choices, and we can talk about what that market looks like, but people are frustrated by how much they're paying, and we at TekSavvy launched a tool called Pay Less to Connect .ca to help people talk to their MPs about these problems, and the very same issues came up. So why do we need to do this? Oh, and 72,000 Canadians took action in that tool and wrote to their MPs saying that they feel like they're paying too much and they're very frustrated with the current system and a solution is needed. So I think it's very important when we look at telecom policy to make affordability one of those objectives and an outcome of, and to think about it from the lens of this is infrastructure that serves the public, and how can we make it accessible and affordable for everyone?
I think the big challenge in Canada is the lack of political will and lack of political direction. The government has not come out strongly in favor of competition in the telecommunications markets, and this is very discouraging. I think there are two things that are needed. You need, first of all, an ability to summon market forces into the telecommunications sector. People like TekSavvy, people like the new entrants in the wireless market, are being hammered every day by the incumbents and their flacker brands. They're having difficulty getting service and interconnection. And there are dozens of ways in which the incumbents are crippling their would-be competitors. This should be intolerable in any kind of market-based society. So I think, first of all, you need to get a market system that works, maximize competition, and that's particularly by the MVNOs, and the resellers, if you will. And then the second stage, I think, is that what cannot be supplied through the marketplace should properly be a matter of government priority and urgency. And that means spending money. So yes, a mix of true market policies combined with substantial subsidies. I mean, we're talking about, spending $100 million over 12 years to connect people. I'm sorry, that's a drop in the bucket. Our ambition should be to get gigabyte service to every home in Canada. That is what people need. That's what Canada needs. Why are people sitting on their hands still? I don't know.
I'm going to move to you, Giselle, and then go the opposite way, because your organization has championed a rather different program. Janet and Philip, you talked about empowering smaller providers to compete using existing infrastructure, or using rented last mile and so on. Giselle, Acorn has focused on a program that really targets the owners of the last mile around lowered cost bills for some households.
Yes, Acorn is a national member-based organization of low and moderate income families, and we fight for social and economic justice. One of our campaigns is Internet for All. This came up at meetings because we have regular meetings with the members, and that issue of high cost of internet came up. So what we did is we did a survey. We had organizers and members going door to door in low-income neighborhoods, because if they don't have internet, they won't be able to fill out a survey. And we also had the survey online, and we accumulated close to 500 responses. And with that, we were able to go to the CRTC, present these almost 500 testimonials. We succeeded in getting CRTC to recognize that it was a basic service. They were wondering, is this a need or a want? And it was determined, they agreed it was a need. So we asked them. We also wanted them to do something to lower the cost of internet, and they said that was not their mandate, and directed us to the Minister of Innovation. And there we got to have a face-to-face meeting with the minister. We were on a work group with the big telecoms, and out of that, there's a new program that started last year. It's Connecting Families, and families that get the maximum Canada Child benefit are eligible for a $10 a month internet access at 10 megabits and 500 megs of data. So we were happy to see that, but that only opens it up for 220,000 families, and there are over 1 million families that are low income. So we're continuing our fight because we want to see the government expand this to all people on low income.
Madeleine, is that the kind of program that would work where you are?
That program's interesting, but I think what I really want to say is that we've got a very fractured and broken sort of system, which actually needs a thorough rethink. And while the federal government just recently announced that they're going to put a lot more money into trying to achieve some basic goals, 50-10, for 90% of Canadians by 2021, and then 95% of Canadians by 2026, and then 100% Canadians by 2030. But the reality is, in that time frame, the 50-10 is that's a goal that we should be trying to achieve at a much sooner rate. There's whole sort of, issues, everything from CRTC has said that we need to break down monopolies, but then we see the ISED, programs perpetuating monopolies. We see that the big telecommunication companies are not allowing, community-based driven approaches or smaller companies to come into the marketplace. So the Internet Society, the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, which represent 90% of communities across Canada, are pushing for a national broadband strategy, because without a strategy, without a proper sort of, a policy approach, looking at where our system is broken, How do we achieve, this great program, but it needs to be, encompassing an overarching look at how do we fix the system? How do we achieve these goals that we're setting out without a plan in place?
How do we fix the system, Tamir?
You want me to fix it now? I thought we were still.
Well, let's start with, let's start with why it's so important.
I think we definitely need to do more than we're doing. Absolutely. The levels of investment that we're putting in from the government. So just as a starting point, I do agree with what my colleagues were saying. Internet is, this is obvious at this point, but it's essential to participation in modern life. I think in Canada we have a particular opportunity to really, given that we have such a rural presence, we have a real opportunity to leverage the internet in ways that will allow rural areas to overcome physical barriers and participate in a lot of things that they would not be able to otherwise. So for Canada, there's a particular benefit to, and we heard from the keynote earlier on some examples of how that's manifesting already. But I think with greater connectivity, that could happen more and more. So we have I think for Canada, both from an economic perspective and from an individual, empowerment perspective, we should be doing all that we can. This should be a top priority. It isn't. I think the data is, we like to turn to data, but the data is also telling here the fact that our costs are among the highest in the world, but we have decent coverage in terms of, most people in Canada have some sort of internet access option, but the number of people who are connected, who are actually using those options in Canada is amongst the lowest in the OECD, which means that price is really keeping people off the network. And even the people who are on the network are using it less. So like in mobile in particular, we're using people in Canada are using their mobile data less than anywhere than most other places in the OECD. And this is a response to the high prices that we're experiencing. So I think you can see that the price is really the variable here. The way to bring it down, there's a lot of options. There's some regulatory, some will have to be money come from the government, but I don't know if you want me to do all those now or
Let's work our way there. First of all,
let's do that.
let me ask about some of the partial solutions, Philip, that we've raised. We've heard a little bit about making telecom services affordable in different ways, and at the same time, we've talked, and you've talked about bringing new players into the market. Some of the ways in which we've tried to make them affordable aren't about bringing new players into the market. They're almost, Madeleine, you talked about, reinforcing the monopolies and so on. Where do we fit as between the kinds of program that Giselle described and the kinds of program or approach, for example, that Janet has been talking about? Are those compatible?
You're asking me? Okay. I think the primary objective has to be to properly address the segments of the market where there is market failure. And that is the case where we're dealing with the poor. It's the case where we're dealing with the remote and isolated communities, and all of cottage country. 30 miles from Ottawa, your service deteriorates to practically zero. You're back in the 1990s, and that's just simply intolerable. So there needs to be sustained government interest in this and funding to make up the difference between what people can afford and what is affordable. And there's going to be a gap there. What market will tell you is this is the price at which this service can be delivered. If there's competition, that price will be driven towards cost. And so that gives you the idea of where this is. And then how do you get people who cannot meet that market price into that infrastructure. And that, I think, is the role of government. And I think that requires money. And if private sector can't do that, fine. That's a good role for government to provide infrastructure, just like they provide roads.
I see some mics going up. Did somebody have...
I was going to say, it is a role for government and government investment, but we've also had a history of using sort of cross-subsidization within telecommunication companies in Canada. That's how we got telephone connected, right? I mean, we can do the same with internet. We can say, like, you know, your profit margins are not. I mean, you can set it up in a way that there's a regulatory solution that can go alongside the government investment solution that requires, maybe more investment in rural areas and areas that are recognized as being a higher cost, but a cap on pricing in those areas that are going to lead to even higher costs that are in other areas where competition is never going to necessarily solve the solution, and allow for some sort of cross-subsidization from the profits that are being made in urban jurisdictions where the cost of providing the services isn't as high, and where, again, the data tells us that the telecommunication companies in Canada, the incumbents in particular, are making very large profit margins.
Madeleine, you're working to bring an internet exchange to your community. Why is that important as part of this conversation?
Well, one of the things that I've been trying to do as a politician who, has an important role to play in a capital city context, is how do we improve connectivity so that all levels of government who are situated in Iqaluit can actually function? How can we support businesses so that they don't fall further behind? And how do we connect our residents? So part of the sort of the assessment of, well, how do we make the incremental improvements, and thankfully learning about the value of an internet exchange and how you can manage data much better at the community level, how it's possible to have data stored on servers that would make it a lot more practical. So I'll give you one real example. So the government of Nunavut has approximately 2,500 employees, and you can imagine, every year they've got to renew their Microsoft application, and it's now all sort of, online downloading versus what you used to get, which were the discs. So it is a nightmare to try to actually have, every governmented computer sort of download an application at great cost. It's constantly dropping and constantly failing. So an internet exchange point can really help sort of take some of that type of data and make it way more accessible. And so there's also cultural content that we're creating in Nunavut, which is of course Inuit specific. It's language, and yet because of the quality and the cost of our connectivity, most of that gets edited in the south and then uploaded or loaded onto servers in the south, which means that the rest of the world has better access to our cultural content than we do. So there's a whole bunch of reasons why it makes sense to actually proceed with that, and also the neutrality of it, having learned that in some places where if you don't take ownership of it and control early on, you can find yourself in a situation where a telecommunication company comes in and sets it up and then shuts the others out, which is a nightmare. And we're also seeing in some cases where in the north, the government subsidy programs, our two main companies are always competing against each other because they don't really have that sort of, well, I would say is that neutral sort of approach to providing service. So what we want to do is also facilitate actually other companies coming in to create that sort of competition, or locally owned ISPs, because SSI Micro is not a Nunavut-owned company, nor is Northwest Tel. So it's part of looking at that sort of picture, and also if we can get the IXP, it makes a better case for actually bringing fiber, a connection from Nuuk, Greenland to Iqaluit, because Iqaluit, while we're only one of 25 communities of 25% of the population in Nunavut, we consume over 75% of the broadband for the entire territory. So it makes a lot of, sense from a governance point of view. It makes a lot of sense from an economic point of view and a societal point of view. So it's what I'm trying to do is say that, region by region and nationally, I think there are these key elements of infrastructure and investments that you get huge returns on.
And promoting competition is part of bringing that investment. Giselle, should companies like TekSavvy also have to offer $10 packages?
If they can afford it. But when he was explaining how TekSavvy functioned, it made me think of the big problem they had in the States with the railroads. I think at the end of the 19th century or beginning of the 20th century, where these monopolies of railroads would charge smaller, some that own trains to get on their tracks. They charge them more, so if a farmer had to send his grain to Chicago or whatever, if he had only that other supplier, they would cost a lot more, so the government of the United States intervened. And I don't see why the government of Canada doesn't intervene to make sure there's a fair playing ground for everybody.
Janet, the CRTC, when it held its basic services hearing, and I know Giselle and actually most of you, I think, in this panel intervened in it, one of the arguments considered was the idea that, look, in outlying areas where there isn't even an economic case for one broadband provider, to go and then have to engineer the network so that multiple broadband providers could go and use it was simply not a justifiable cost.
I mean, that's a hard statement to wrestle with, because what we're really saying is that there's going to be some areas in Canada who are going to be locked into a monopoly. And is that really what we want? Is that the best way to serve those Canadians? Will they be able to access the services on terms that are reasonable and affordable to them? I do want to kind of go back to Giselle's talking about the $10 affordable internet plan, and it's a great question whether TekSavvy should do a plan like that, because we've been trying to figure out how we can do our part and help to make our internet services more affordable. So we're looking at, if we can do a $10 internet plan on the facilities where we have built, and we're investing in. But on the wholesale side, which is how we serve most of our customers, it's very, we're basically looking at, do we offer $10 internet when our wholesale rates are sometimes double that? And so we would be taking a loss, A, and B, if we decided to accept that loss, we would be paying the wholesale providers, and they would be making, they would be compensated for our use of their network plus earning a markup on that. So it's a bit of a catch-22. We certainly want to do our part on affordability, but we struggle, as my colleague Andy spoke a lot to earlier, with the wholesale policies in Canada entrenching a lot of the incumbency advantages through very high wholesale rates and other barriers that challenge the degree to which we can offer competitive services or competitive prices and help make internet more affordable for Canadians. We definitely want to do our part. When the CRTC dropped the wholesale rates in 2016 because they said that the incumbent costing had completely ignored their methodologies, double counted. CRTC said it was very disturbed and dropped a lot of the wholesale rates on a range of 30 to 90%, depending on the carrier. When the CRTC dropped our wholesale rates in 2016, we reduced prices for our customers to over 98% of our customers, and also in market, because that was the right thing to do, but that's also because that's how competition works. So, we're doing what we can from our corner of the world, but I think it speaks to the importance of getting these wholesale policies right, especially if that's the competition that we want to lead to the outcome of affordable internet for everyone.
What are the next steps? And maybe I'll come back to you, Janet. We'll work our way across. But if we were to ask, bottom line, having heard these different proposals as between wholesale competition and retail regulation, I think those have been the themes. What should the government do if you had a magic wand, but your magic wand was restricted to things that would actually work? Janet, what are the two things one or two that you'd like to see actually happen?
So the most immediate thing that could happen, I'm hoping within the next few weeks, is a policy direction from the government to the CRTC to put consumers first and to make sure that competition in all forms is the outcome of their decision making to foster affordability and lower prices. The government has already proposed this policy direction. They're in a position where they could finalize it in the next over the next month, and that would be a very huge step. In addition to that, they need to repeal the old.
Why would that be a huge step? What would be different?
So it forces the CRTC to put consumers first and shake this old theory that we know doesn't work, which is facilities-based competition. So we know that we can't just rely on competition based on infrastructure or the number of wires into your home. We need to enable competition in all forms, and we need to focus that competition and facilitate that competition to serve consumers. We know that competition lowers prices. We know that it drives innovations. It can increase different packages available to consumers. It offers consumers more choices. These are all things that we know we want out of telecom, and it will direct the CRTC to get there in its policymaking.
Philip, same direction?
Well, certainly I agree with Janice's proposals. I would go further, or go in a different direction as well. I think that we would be very well served if there were structural separation between the network operations of our incumbent carriers and their retail arms. At the moment, one of the reasons why so many service providers are having difficulties is because the CRTC tolerates the inbuilt service providers, the retail arms of Bell, Rogers, TELUS, to play with their networks. And that strikes me as being fundamentally anti-competitive, and also means that you hide a wealth of sins within a corporate structure. And the simplest and cleanest competition remedy is always thought to be structural rather than regulatory. And I feel that structural separation between the operation of the networks and the retail arms of those entities would mean that people like TekSavvy could really fight on a competitive basis with the flanker brands of the majors, Virgin Mobile, for instance, and you would have a real look at the actual cost of operating those networks.
And very briefly, but can we really get there from here? I mean, these are companies, we have thousands and hundreds of thousands of pensions invested in these companies and so on. Wouldn't that cause havoc in the Canadian economy?
I don't think it would cause havoc. I think the Canadian economy would simply be disburdened of huge white elephants. The amount of savings that you could probably get out of Bell Canada, if it were properly managed, would be enormous, and it would be unlocking innovation and competition. Small guys, small businesses, everybody would benefit. Who's harmed? The other answer is, of course, that we do have examples in Australia and Britain, the fourth largest economy in the world, or fifth, where they have taken BT and they have split it quite successfully, not without hiccups. I mean, there's a lot of resistance and a lot of work to be done, but it's been done. Australia is doing the same thing. So it's not like this is from outer space. It's an actual, real telecommunications policy option that we just simply have ignored.
Tamir, you got anything from outer space for us?
I'll just say, so structural separation, I don't think will, I think there'll still be, two or more companies to run. They'll just be wholesale and retail. So in terms of jobs, at least, it might lead to more jobs, but less baby profits, which is, I think, where the biggest margin in Canada that actually exists that can be leveraged to solve some of these problems is right now, is that just looking at the comparative the comparative data, we have some of the higher profit margins among developed countries. I think structural separation would be one way of getting at that. And
do you mean structural separation of both the telecom and the cable companies that compete, or just one or the other of them?
I think you'd have to either put all wholesale in one entity, which that would be very difficult, because there you'd have to actually split up companies, or just split up all wholesale and retail in the largest providers. I don't actually think, though, that we're gonna get. I don't know if this is a viable. I mean, it's definitely a viable solution. In Australia, they set up a wholesale entity, and it's been functioning well. And their prices, they have some of the same challenges as us in terms of rural density, and in terms of investment. And they've gotten very good quality internet at very good prices in ways that we haven't been able to manage. I don't know if the political or regulatory wherewithal is there to do that. So I'm going to suggest some additional solutions that they can consider in the meanwhile as well. And I think there's essentially three problems that I'll go through very quickly that need to be solved, and give one for each, because they require separate things. So one is low income. So one is the general, high prices across the board. And I think competition solves that very well. I think there's low income households that are going to be priced out regardless, that should still have access, but not just $10 for 100 gig access, because I don't think that's enough. I think we should be a bit more ambitious. They should have the same access that everybody else has. It'll cost a bit more. It'll drive down profits a bit, but there should be something to compel that. And then the rural challenge is one where competition can help there, and you should still have competition in rural areas, and there's ways of addressing that through wholesale tariffs. There should be a tariff for spectrum, maybe, so that municipalities, if they want to build local spectrum, local wireless networks on spectrum, if they have the backhaul to do it, there should be a way to do that.
And by tariff, you mean compelling those who hold the spectrum to sell it under a standard contract to others?
So they would have to build, there's no way to get spectrum from a municipality right now. They would have to, build some antennas and plug into the backhaul, but then they would be able to, get the spectrum from the incumbent or whoever owns it in the area at cost, maybe with a little bit of a margin, 5%, not higher, because we're trying to connect people, and then they could provide a local network there. Other types of, there is an investment fund already, obviously, too, that anyone can build out of in rural areas. There's just not enough money there to allow for many new parties to build local networks, so that has to go up and be increased. And the last thing the last thing there is that where we have, to the competition point, the thing that we need to fix there is the way that the tariff system works right now is, I think this has been touched on by a bunch of people, but the way that we calculate the costs for those tariffs is broken, and the way that we roll them out to new technologies is incredibly slow. It's like we're almost, it's 10 years behind. It's got to be faster. It's got to be proactive, and there's got to be a way to make sure that it's clings very closely to costs. If we don't get structural separation, which would be the other way to get to that.
So we need costing school. Sorry? So we need costing school.
We need costing cops is what we need.
Madeleine, what do you think about that?
It seems to me if the telecoms were charging less, they wouldn't be making the huge profits they were making, and they tried to extend their infrastructure to get up more customers from all over Canada. Right now, they're quite easy and comfortable with the prices they charge.
Well, Giselle, what would you like to see happen? If you had,
Well, I would like
if that microphone is your magic wand.
I'd like them to lower their prices. If they can't do it, then have the government force them to reduce their prices.
Madeleine?
I think the fact that the government is prepared to invest gives the government quite a lot of leverage in deciding how that investment is going to enroll. There's issues around definitions. Something as simple as open source in our jurisdiction has turned out not to mean what, access to competitors, and that therefore if we can in the north we have and demand transparency of where those public investments are going for Nutrition North, but we don't do it for telecommunications. So it feels like sometimes it's like a Wizard of Oz scenario where you want to pull behind the curtains and you know that it's a mess back there, and that we do fundamentally need to figure out how as a country, and how with the billions of dollars that our government is prepared to invest, is to actually work with some very smart people. There's lots of them in this room and in this country, and there are other models that we can look at. I remember being in the UK about 20 years ago, and Canada was much cheaper at on our internet costs than it is, and it's the reverse now. And so we are definitely not innovative, we're not strategic, and I think we can do better. There is a legislative review happening on the Communications Act. I think there is, that piece of legislation has some laudable goals and objectives, but is completely disconnected from the actual departments who have this, or agencies like CRTC and ISED and now NRC, in how we're going to unroll those funds. So the status quo is not acceptable. We actually have to stop the madness and decide how we're going to achieve the goals and objectives that we know that everyone is saying has to be done, and just do it. Sounds easy, but it's a hell of a lot of hard work.
Any questions on how we do it from the audience? Denis, so Denis Carmel is asking whether, do you mean retail rate regulation? Yeah.
The question is, if the rates are too high from the government perspective or the commission perspective, there's not, you talked about engineering competition. It's been tried. The chairman used to work for Colnet, I think. That won't work in the long term. You either have to regulate the rates at the retail or threaten to. Otherwise, we're talking.
I agree with that.
I think this is exactly the question. There's a spectrum of policy options that we as a country can consider. If we want to go back, or we are already heading back with the launch of new technologies where there is no wholesale access, if we are heading back to a world of monopoly or an oligopoly that controls the infrastructure, and that is, we're looking at not very vigorous competition between them, then the solution there is rate regulation to bring those rates down. Then your other extreme option, which Philip discussed, was breaking up those monopolies so that there is structural separation between their service delivery and their network operations, which it ensures that they are focusing on building out those networks and in making those investments, and then the service providers can access those on fair terms and deliver affordable services or compete to deliver affordable services to consumers. The middle option, which I think the Commission has already chosen, and the government is wholesale, opening up, or at least for internet, and they're now discussing whether to do this in the wireless space, opening up the networks for wholesale access by wholesale-based competitors like TekSavvy. And if you're going to pursue that option, which we have, then they need to do wholesale regulation in a robust, transparent, and timely manner that is alive to market realities. So we cannot be waiting half a decade for rates to be finalized. We can't be dealing with costing studies that are effectively black boxes where the incumbents are tabling what they say it costs to build their network, and then we spend half a decade trying to challenge those, and the CRTC effectively says, oh yeah, those were wrong, we got to bring them down, and now the wholesale-based competitors have overpaid for many, many years. It can't take 4 years to finalize access to new networks while they're having head starts selling to consumers. So if we are going to say wholesale policies are the way to bring down competition, which is what the CRTC said in its basic services decision, it said on the affordability question, we will trust that our wholesale policies will deliver affordable services for Canadians, then they have to do it. They have to commit to it, they have to commit the resources and the expertise to do it in a way that works for Canadians.
My one comment on rate regulation is that it's extremely complex, and to attempt rate regulation at the wholesale or retail level simply invites every form of economic gaming on the part of the incumbents. And I remember a conversation with an economist who worked at the Department of Communications probably 35 years ago now. And he was investigating rate regulation and how the CRTC was determining rates. And then he looked at me and he said, sat me down and said, they cheat. They lie. You can't believe a single word that's in any of their costing reports. And who has the time and the ability to second guess every line on every page that is submitted in the thousands by the incumbent network operators? I think we've got to find better ways than rate regulation, frankly, and competition, I think, is the only way that I can see forward.
Well, thinking acorn-wise and advocacy, just came to mind. This is an election year, and digital access touches everybody. Maybe we should get the politicians to talk about digital access and see who's going to vote for them on that.
Rate regulation, sorry. I think there is a role for rate regulation to particularly address low-income households and perhaps in rural areas in particular, or high-cost areas, we should say. I don't know if it'll work across the board because you have so many you have so many tiered packages these days that it's going to be hard, I think, to do that fully. But obviously you get the same challenges when you're trying to figure out what the costing is at the wholesale level and how to provide that type of cost at a level that is reflective of cost, which is the model that we depend on to allow for wholesale competition right now. So I don't know, maybe splitting them up is the way to do it, but I imagine that even then they will also find a way.
They'll cheat.
I have like this last one, so just to close on. So I spoke to a former BT lawyer once, and I won't say who it is, but he said his line was always, telecom companies have 3 sets of books, one for the regulator, one for the shareholders, and then the actual ones. So anyways, I'll just leave on that.
Madeleine, I'll give you the final word. You haven't...
Maybe I'll just add, you're right, it is an election year. And the fact is that most politicians, recognize that this is an issue, but have no clue what to do beyond that. So if you want to sort of, dictate or influence policy, this is the time to do it, but you need to you can't actually look to the politicians, unfortunately, to sort of say, okay, they're underinformed, they don't know what that policy should be. So the question is who is going to be pushing, the right policy solutions in this country?
I don't want to call it a segue, but here you are. Thanks very much to the panel. This was great.
That was a great panel. Thank you so much, Bram. Talking affordability.